Okay, the moment has come. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you if you're new, and all the rest of y'all, what's up? How are we feeling? I hope that this new year's gotten off to a decent start for you, but if it hasn't, it's okay. I think it's ridiculous, actually, that we put all this pressure on ourselves to get off to a good start. You know, we have these New Year's resolutions and this notion that in January we're supposed to come in hot. You know, we're supposed to hit the ground running in 2022. I call bullshit on that. You know why? Because I'm sitting here in the attic, and if you were here last week, I mentioned there was some snow on the ground. There still is, but I can't see it because the windows are completely frosted over. The temperature has dropped drastically here in Pennsylvania. It's like 15 degrees out there, and it feels like the dead of winter right now. So everything that the environment is saying to me would have me just sleeping and not doing stuff. I really ought to be in a more hibernation mode. But there's this other voice in my head that's like, it's irresponsible. You got to get to work. Got to be productive. You got to do shit. So it's a stupid thing that we have. It's a stupid thing that we've set up for ourselves where we have this pressure on us to be productive, particularly at times of the year like right now, where it's really not the time to be trying to do a lot, you know? It should be time to rest. And I try. I do my best to carve out time where I just don't have to be doing stuff, but it's not that easy. You got to really carve it out. And I feel guilty sometimes, I'm being lazy, and I just got to keep reminding myself, that no, it's fundamental to my health for me to have time where I'm not on the clock. So, who cares how your year's going, all right? I'm sorry I even said that. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how your year's going so far, Maybe what more important is how we are in this moment, How are you in this moment? Are you doing okay? I hope so. I got some feedback recently from a listener or two about the show, about how they felt that I may be kind of veering in different directions that aren't necessarily yoga. And I thought about it a lot, because if you've been around the last few weeks, I have been having these conversations with folks who certainly have their foot in yoga, but they're not yoga teachers solely. And a lot of what their work isn't directly doing yoga classes. But this conversation I've been having about animism and these questions I keep asking every guest who comes on about spirit or about intuition or about consciousness and whether or not it's shaping the material world, these burning questions in me these days, I am of the view that they have everything to do with yoga. And frankly, I've got lots of invitations out right now, and I don't know, the yoga world has, as I've talked about over the last few weeks, evaporated in many regards. So I'm seeking out resources, people who will engage me in these conversations. And if you're listening right now and you think you're someone who is that person, or someone you think I should talk to, you should definitely reach out to me. But what I want to say is that this conversation today with my old friend Cory Nakasue and next week too. Those are the remaining ones in this like series I've been talking about of conversations with people I knew at other times in my life. And all these conversations for me are coming together around some ideas, and I will be, I think, directly connecting them to my yoga more in the future. But for right now, I think that these are fundamental questions in my view. If you read my recent blog post, The Reenchantment of Yoga, I really do think that if we are identifying as yoga teachers and we're thinking about how our work is going to be useful in the world going forward, there's some important questions for us to be considering when it comes to where yoga comes from and what its purposes are. So that's what I've been doing over the last few weeks, and I will be doing today and next week too, is probing these questions with people who are willing to engage me on them. And my guest today, Cory, you'll see, she is sort of a perfect example of many things for me. I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to spoil anything. But this conversation kind of came out of nowhere while I was away over the holidays. If you remember, I came to you for 1 week while I was in Virginia. Well, when I was in Virginia, I recorded this conversation with Cory, and it really just shed so much light on what I've been thinking about, and hearing her come up against sort of the same questions and hearing how she has moved forward with them has just been helpful to me. And I am hoping to you as well. It was great fun to reconnect with her after so many years, and I'm excited that you're going to get to listen to it today. Real quick before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to our podcast premium subscribers. Today, I want to send some special love to Charlie Chappelle and Sophie Chrisman. Thanks, Charlie and Sophie. Appreciate you a lot. And for anyone else out there who's been listening to the show and wants to have access to the full archives or wants to be a part of supporting this, because we don't have any more sponsors or ads, we stopped doing that. We are only listener supported at this point, and becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the way to do it. It's choose your rate. You cancel at any time. If you were hoping to get to those old episodes, you don't have any money, you just email us and we will definitely give you a free account. But for as little as $5 a month, you could definitely be of great help to this show, to me. And I am grateful to those who do that. You can learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber along with all of my other stuff. I have weekly live stream classes and a weekly teacher sangha that you're very welcome to join in on. I also have on-demand stuff. I got lots of stuff. You can find everything at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that will do. I will touch base with you on the other side so that we can have a little debrief if you want. But first, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Cory Nakasue. Hello?
Hello?
Cory.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Totally. Well, Cory, thank you so much for taking up my invitation and booking a time. Like, this kind of worked out perfect for me. I'm actually away from home. I'm at my in-laws, but it was kind of, I don't know, it kind of worked out perfect. And I was so excited to get a chance to talk to you. So thanks for doing this.
Well, thanks for inquiring. I'm always excited to talk to a new person these days.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Maybe we'll get to that later. But
right.
I was excited to talk to you. And just so you know where it comes from is that I'm having this conversation with you is almost, I think, part of a series almost of people who I knew or I met at another time in my life whose names have randomly sort of popped up recently. And when I say, oh, let me check out what they're doing, they're like totally singing the same song that I'm singing right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. And so you're one of at least like 3 or 4 people that this has happened to, like in the last few weeks.
Oh, cool.
And I know our paths crossed very briefly recently when I started that business class that you jumped into for a month or two. And I was like, Cory, oh my God. But we didn't really get a chance to connect so much directly, like one-to-one.
No.
And I didn't really look at what you were doing so closely, honestly.
Okay.
But the other day, I was specifically thinking about astrology and really, I don't know, I have all these ideas in my head that I don't know where they came from about astrology that I don't think are accurate at all. Mm-hmm. And I thought I would like to have a conversation about astrology. I did this with like I Ching and tarot not so long ago. And I was like, I think I need to talk to somebody about astrology. And your name immediately popped in my head because I remember when I got reconnected in a little brief way with you, you were doing astrology. And I was like, oh, let me check out Cory. And I found your astrology website. Mm-hmm. And I just read what the copy you had on the front page. And you were talking about stories and narratives and the use of archetypes and not predictive astrology or something. So I was like, whoa, I immediately emailed you and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. What, do you have an initial question?
I have lots of questions for you. But before we dive into astrology, which is, again, the primary reason I reached out, I also feel compelled to give us some context, or at least the people listening, because we have the context. Because like I said, I know you from another time in my life. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking just before we got on, all of the memories I have of you. And I know the first one that jumped in is that when I opened Abhyasa Yoga Center in Brooklyn in 2007, it was either that year, later in the year, or at the beginning of 2008 that I did my first teacher training. And I did it for free because it was the first time I was ever doing it. And I needed just to try it once to figure out what I wanted to do with it. So I was like, let me do one for free. And I put it out because I remember Jiva Mukti had done their first teacher training for free back in the day. So I was sort of following in that footstep. And about 45 people, if I recall, showed up to do it. And if I recall, you were one of those people, along with your 2 friends. What were their names? Brent?
And Kristen.
Yes, Kristen. Yeah. And I think that you had maybe attended my class previously, or at least one or both of them had prior to the training. You guys had been in my class before the training, but you were in that first training. Am I right? Do I have that memory correct?
Yes, you are correct.
And I remember you were doing movement stuff at that time, dance, performance, and other just you were a mover, a somatic mover person back then. Do I remember that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was before everybody in the yoga world had become a somatic mover too.
Yeah.
Honestly, including me. I put myself there too, because I was still way more in a conventional yoga mind. Although I was breaking out in lots of different ways too.
Yeah.
In any case, I remember you started a training, but I don't know that you finished it. A lot of people didn't finish it. It was kind of not all very structured or clear, but I believe Kristen stuck around to the end and ended up doing some teaching at the center, if I remember.
Maybe she did. Yeah. I stuck around for all of the teachings, and then I did not do the apprenticeship part or the assistant teaching part. Yeah.
Right. Because you had your own thing going on. I remember that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I really remember about, it wasn't so much you, but you were part of that crew, the three of you, is that Brent made that video with me for the yoga center that we had on the homepage.
Right. Yeah.
And it was one of the first, like we were, I think one, if not the first, like yoga center that had that, like the promo intro video on the homepage, because it was early days internet even.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Brent managed to know how to do it. But I look back, that video is still on YouTube. And the quality is so much lesser than what we do nowadays, you know?
Yeah.
Because we didn't, how, like the technology has increased so much. We all, like independent creators, can make stuff that's almost on par with like bigger end production companies, you know?
Yeah, that changed rapidly.
It did. So anyways, all of that is like painting a picture in my mind of that time in Brooklyn.
Right.
Which was quite vibrant. I don't know, it was for me at that time. You were dancing and moving. Was that how you were paying your rent, or were you doing other stuff for money?
No, dancing, moving. I'm a choreographer, and I was teaching a lot of Pilates at the time. And I had studied other types of yoga before, and I just moved to Williamsburg, and literally Abhyasa was right around the corner. And so, you know, we had just arrived in Williamsburg, and we were just like, wow, there's all these things in Williamsburg. And then it's like, oh, did you know that, you know, Jay is doing like free teacher training around the corner? It's like, yeah, let's go. Like, you know, like, how awesome is that? And so, and it was great. I learned so much.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a very like rose colored lens that I look at that time, because it was such a exciting time for me. I just opened that place. It was that big center, and it was still before the neighborhood got crazy and unreasonable. It was like a still bodega and artists finding cheap rent outside of the city, you know?
Yeah, that happened so fast.
I know.
Like, that was amazing to just watch everything like transform in like a matter of a couple years.
And it was a couple of years. I mean, I stuck it out until 2017 for 10 years there, but by the time I was leaving, it had transformed.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, I guess I'm curious, how long did you stay in Williamsburg? When did you move out?
So Brent and I actually bought a house upstate in the Hudson Valley. So we're in Kingston right now in 2014. And then we did this back and forth thing for about 3 years. And then I finally took the plunge and started living up here full time in 2017. And then Brent followed suit in 2018.
Yeah.
It was around the same time.
You guys got out too. We got out kind of at a good time.
I think so. It just became not only not a sustainable way to live life and also be a creative person. I actually started to find it to be undesirable. It was not the city that I had initially moved to, and all the reasons that I was excited to be there for, you know, like the first 10 years or so that I was there were really evaporating. So, and also, you know, we had some money to buy something, and there was nothing to buy.
Yeah, you couldn't buy there if you wanted to, unless you had like millions of dollars, all cash offer or whatever.
Right. Like buying like a 1-bedroom tiny apartment in Brooklyn would have wiped us out.
Yeah.
So we started looking upstate, and things are good here. But to be honest, I feel like I'm kind of witnessing another gentrification catastrophe.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because we moved to Pennsylvania, to Easton, Pennsylvania in 2017. But we, back in 2014, I believe it was, my wife and I, when we were having our first daughter, or after we'd had our first daughter, we were thinking of moving back then too. And we looked at a place in Saugerties because we had friends in High Falls and we knew a lot of people up there in that area that you're in.
Yeah.
And we ended up not going there because we felt like, I don't know, for me, I felt like, oh, the population density wasn't enough to support what I was doing. I mean, little did I know everything was going to go online and it wasn't going to matter so much.
Yeah.
But that's why we didn't go there. But the Hudson Valley is beautiful. And I always felt kind of a calling there. I know for me, a lot of it was wanting to be able to take a walk in the woods more readily.
Yeah, it is. It's really beautiful, but it really feels at the moment like it's just this very distant suburb or this like other borough of the city. I have a lot of friends who moved up here. I have a lot of clients who moved up here, and things it doesn't seem so different anymore, which I don't like. I loved that it felt, that I felt like I was really out in the woods and somewhere different. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, but still you have like a home base that you made for yourself, like we did. And in a way, I mean, I don't know about you, but I look back to the $3,000 I was spending a month renting apartments for years in Brooklyn. And what my current mortgage payment is now. And it's hard to imagine. But like you said, at the time, there was reasons that really made me passionate about being there and why it was such a thriving place to grow and learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I have no regrets about being there, but I just didn't feel like I needed anymore.
Yeah. And the time came. And like you said, the place had changed so much, it was much easier to leave it.
Absolutely. And I'm still close enough. I still do a little bit of, prior to 2020, I was still, going into the city fairly regularly to do some artwork and to do some teaching.
Me too. I can get there in 2 hours if I want, but I don't go. I haven't been there in years. I mean, I went for a show not so long ago when they were doing outdoor shows for a minute there when things were feeling okay again.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, when I was on my way out of the city, I wanted to stop for like a slice at my same old spot down near Ludlow. And there was a pizza place there, but it wasn't the one that I knew. And it was kind of like very dystopian feel. I gotta say, like it freaked me out. Like the city I don't know when the last time you were there, but I know it's come back some, but it really felt hollowed out in certain ways. And I don't know, it freaked me out.
Yeah, I haven't hung out there in about 2 years. So I haven't gotten the feel for what it's been like over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
But I can imagine, certainly.
Yeah, well, I don't really want to focus too much on the dismay of the moment.
Okay.
Because part of the thread I've been picking at that leads us to talking is really wanting to explore what I've heard others refer to as the wisdom and tools of our ancestors. Mm-hmm. And that's partly looking at indigenous cultures, and it partly is about having permission to let go of a certain, materialist, scientific, reductionist way of looking at life.
Right.
And what some people kind of in certain circles refer to as new animism. And
ooh, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, new animism. The idea is that 99% of our ancestors lived in an animate world.
Right.
Where there were forces and you could receive messages and speak to your ancestors or sing to the rocks and they would sing back to you. And there was community rituals that involved synchronized movement and singing that people did together. Mm-hmm. And there was initiatory rituals and all these things that were in a context of a world that is alive. And I believe that yoga comes from that context too. But in the kind of mainstreaming of it, it got turned into fitness regimes and stuff, But ultimately, I'm interested in practical ways of thinking about these aspects of our experience that to some people are thought of as almost like superstitious or religious, and to me, it's not. To me, it's just, if you actually slow yourself down and pay your attention to yourself and inwards into the environment, a lot of these things feel very obvious.
Yeah.
So in any case, that's a long-winded way to say that I think astrology is like that too. And the way that you present on your website certainly seems so. My first question about it is, I read that you first got interested in astrology at a very early age, like when you were a kid. And I'm curious how that happens. Do you have like very hippie parents or something? Or did you get exposed to it in some way when you were young that brought that interest about?
Well, so I grew up in Southern California in the 70s. So
me too. San Fernando Valley, Canoga Park, Woodland Hills.
Yeah, I was North Hollywood and then moved to like the Long Beach area. And so my parents had a lot of friends who were into things like astrology, and my mom had a lot of friends who were psychics, and my grandpa was a Native American healer type shamanic guy. And my father's from Hawaii, and my grandma used to tell me a lot of the old heritage stories of Hawaii and the mythologies of Hawaii. So I kind of grew up on all of that. And then on my own, I just found my way to astrology books and got really into it, really connected with it, and still had all these other types of studies and histories kind of swirling around me. And I just spoke that language for a very long time until I stopped for a while, because I think as I was getting older, like into my 20s and 30s, I got very into, the arts, and I became an academic. And then I started teaching people, about their bodies. And so I was into a lot of science, and I was working with doctors and psychologists. And I kind of didn't want to deal with these other things that I had grown up with, because from a cultural perspective, I think I felt like I couldn't be taken seriously on this like new academic artistic path that I was on, and I very much wanted to, or I couldn't be taken seriously as someone who could help people with their, biology and their biomechanics. I felt like I had to relate everything back to some kind of hard science, or I had to relate everything back to some accredited, certifiable a credential that I knew what I was doing, or I was an expert at what I was doing. And to bring in something like astrology and Hawaiian mythology and clairvoyance, like, oh no, I can't do that now that I'm trying to be like this serious adult person. So I've been doing a lot of, like rehabilitative Pilates and working with neurologists. That's how I was getting a lot of my clients, and working with things like neuromuscular reeducation, a lot of, nervous system prepping and pruning and building of new neural pathways for people who had things like Parkinson's or MS, working with people who had anxiety. And so I was doing a lot of that. And over time, I noticed that people's response to me was like, did you know that I feel like your work is actually very intuitive? Or instead of, moving today, can we just talk? And I was really enjoying this. And I even thought about going back to school to get my MSW or something. I was thinking about, again, studying so I could be credentialed.
You need to have a certificate if you're going to talk.
Exactly. If I'm going to talk to people. And then after, I was already like in my early 40s at that point, and I was like, oh, this is going to take like another 10 years. Oh, this is going to put me $100,000 in debt. What can I do? How can I organize myself so I can talk to people in a certain way? And that's when I was like, and astrology was just becoming kind of popular. Like I hung my shingle out in like 2014. And it was just starting to get popular again. And I'm like, maybe I should revisit, this astrology thing. And I did, and I studied. And then I put it out there that I was doing astrological counseling. And it was one of the easiest transitions or additions I've ever made in my life.
I'm so curious about that, actually, that transition, or not the transition, that because you said something that is exactly what I've been saying in the last couple months, is that for a long time, I think I've had personal experiences in practice that I didn't necessarily have as part of my teaching, because the whole yoga world moved in the direction that you had gone in. There was all functional movement and bagel tone or whatever. Nobody was chanting anymore. Nobody was like talking about spirit or consciousness or anything. And I think that one of the things I've been saying about these conversations on new animism I've been having is it feels like a little leap of courage that I need to take to say these things without worrying that people aren't going to think I'm legitimate, or they think I'm full of it, or like some flaky yoga teacher. And so you said it, you said you had certificates and you were in the same mindset. And then at some point though, was it because of what people were asking of you, or what gave you the courage, or what was the decision? What was around the process there of saying, you know what, I'm going to tell people I'm an astrologer, even though they might think that's not as legit or something?
Well, it was the feedback that I was getting from people. Here I thought I was, so dazzling with all this stuff that I knew. And people were telling me that it wasn't that was helping them. It was the way that I was tuning into them, or it was the way the stories that I was weaving that was helping them connect. And also, that brought me home to a part of myself that I think I really shoved down into like some, shameful hidden corner of my, self-expression, because I so desperately wanted to be taken seriously, in the world. But what I was getting from people, I guess, this other part of me, the more intuitive part of me, the more, the more just feeling part of me, and the more animal part of me, wild part of me, was like rooting around in other places in people, and not just looking at, the hip bones connected to the, whatever. Like I was feeling things out in different ways, and people were telling me that that's what was actually helpful.
Isn't that interesting? So you let your intuition roam a little bit more free and didn't judge it.
Yeah. And I think I was tired of feeling like I tend to, I have like a ton of certifications and degrees. I did that whole thing. And at the same time that I did that, I was always constantly like rebelling against
yes
the things I was being taught, but also wanting to be accepted. And I just had to let go of that and then just trust what I was doing and how I decided to interpret all those things that I learned.
Yeah. And I think honestly, the last 2 years have been a real process for myself. And I know a lot of other people around this very thing, because like the yoga world essentially collapsed, or all industries, essentially the whole rugs got pulled out from everything.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like whatever this world we were trying to get acceptance from doesn't even exist anymore.
Exactly.
And, everybody's like in their living rooms doing Zoom classes. It really made me have to really look at, okay, well, who am I and who do I want to be if I don't care what anybody else thinks anymore? Or if the people who are coming don't have that same expectation they did in Brooklyn when they walked in the front door on Metropolitan Avenue, when they're coming because they like listen to my show and they're intrigued by me as a person, it becomes this intuitive sharing process like you're describing. It's not
Absolutely.
me like downloading knowledge on them or some shit.
Yep.
Right?
And it was so freeing. And then I could bring in all sorts of things into a session. I could bring in, doing really personal like choreographies with people, like somatic choreographies. And then if they were also doing astrology with me, I could bring, that astrological language into the equation. And then all of a sudden, we're communicating on like 5 different levels instead of me just, talking and describing. Their input as far as the content of whatever transpires between us becomes this really huge creative act.
Isn't that right? It's like a co-creation thing.
Yeah.
And what I'm really intrigued by, because it's something you wrote on your website too, is how like I did like this postmodern dance, like body mind centering a little bit first, then yoga, I did music, like all these different kind of mediums. And I think that what that was about was trying to develop like language and communication skills, but language and communication skills that aren't necessarily like straight up sentences, like the difference between like when you go see a play and like you're following a plot structure or whatever, and when you go to see a dance and someone just does a movement and it hits you, you don't know what it's supposed to be, but you feel it. Yeah. That there's sort of different languages. And I know you've spoken about that in terms of like how you're combining movement stuff and astrology. How do you see that in terms of like the way of developing language?
Ooh. Wow, that's a big question. Movement and astrology, developing language. So with, words, if we're talking about like, the just verbal and the written, if you look at, letters and sentences in and of themselves, like those are just symbols, like originally they have their own, they're infused with their own symbolic content.
And we use words to tell stories.
Yeah.
Right.
And then those stories are infused with their own symbolic content. And that's where we get, things like archetypes. And so astrology is a lot of things. And one of the things is it is a symbolic language. And these archetypes are so powerful. It's because one of the many reasons is because they're old and they have been marinating in in years and years of diverse human experience, so that when, you come across an archetype, it resonates on, I think, more than an intellectual level. And then when we're talking about movement language, I could get into the very, very like, what would be like a pop science-y mirror neuron argument. Or
well, what I was thinking of is something that you wrote. You wrote it language as a symbolic tool for mining larger concepts and feelings.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I was fishing for. Because I think that's what I find intriguing, is that the use of these stories and symbols is about mining larger concepts and feelings, isn't it?
Yes. So thank you. I was like, what exactly is he? Okay. Yeah.
I was fishing around in an oblique way. So let's make it clear. Okay. That's where I was.
Yeah. So if I'm working with someone and we're looking at their chart and I'm describing some of the symbology in the chart, I don't know how that's going to resonate or not resonate with someone, but when we're discussing the stories that are represented in an astrology chart, they invariably bring up something, and it's that content that we then dig into and engage with. And it's numinous because here I am. Usually I'm, sitting across or zooming across from a complete stranger. And just by describing some symbols, there's this reaction and they're feeling it in their body, and it's activating memory, it's activating sensation or emotion. And it's all because of what this symbolic tool was able to go in and call up. And then all of a sudden we have all this content to bring attention to and awareness around and do something creative with.
Well, I think that's interesting. And it goes to what I said at the beginning when I said I had these ideas about astrology that I don't think are accurate, because my idea was always that it was more deterministic or something, that you can read the chart and you can tell somebody what's in their future or some shit. And I know that that's not necessarily the case, but I guess I'm sort of curious about how like that notion is sometimes, I don't know, I've heard skeptical people say that when someone's doing that, when someone offers up an archetype and then someone reacts to it and then that person's listening to it, that's a sign that shows that they're full of it, that they're just making shit up. But what I hear you saying, and what is, I think, my own experience, is that actually it's not that you're not starting from a place where you're supposed to know
exactly
who they are or what they are. You're more of a facilitator. And then there's this co-creative thing happening where they're responding to something and you're just listening and kind of there and communicating with them.
Yeah.
And that brings out whatever it needs to be brought out, that for whatever reason you came together.
Right. Like, so, and I've had the experience of someone will come to me and say, okay, tell me what's going on. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And you know what? The planets and stars don't know what's going on with you. In fact, I don't think they care about what's going on with you. The way I see it, it's like the cosmos is just a form of nature. It's just not terrestrial. So as much like we study the cycles of weather, we study the cycles of, plant growth, and, there's so much to learn about just cycles and time in general from that. If you choose to, want to bring in any of that knowledge into your life. But the same thing, if we think about the nature that happens up in the cosmos, people have been studying these very distinct patterns of planetary movement and stars for centuries. They have been making these patterns just like, our Earth and natural life has patterns, and we learn from it. We bring ourselves into relationship with it to learn something about how to coexist with our environment. It's extractive to think that I'm going to study, this plant growth and see what it says about me and see what it means for me. Like, that plant is doing its own thing. It's for us to learn its language so we can understand how we're part of everything else. Does that make sense?
That's the. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.